It's a Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Glad to be with you this morning, getting another day started with Pitt Talk. Of course, it's draft day, first round of the draft tonight. That's going down, so we've got some things to talk about here. Of course, like I told you, I'm going to be at Stage AE for the draft412.com draft party. It's all sold out, so hopefully you took my advice the last couple of weeks when I've been talking about it on the live Panther-Lair show, or earlier this week when I was talking about it here on the Morning Pit, and hopefully you got tickets so you can come down and hang out at Stage AE and watch the first round of the draft tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it, and if you're going and you're going to be there, say hello and we'll chat about Elijah Cansey and Pitt's other draft prospects and anything else going on, recruiting stuff, football, basketball, all the things we talk about at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. Found it all at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We would appreciate that. The like button's over there somewhere. You can see it, and the subscribe button's right down there. Click that thing. And then, of course, you can turn on notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone anytime we post a new video here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Anytime we go live like we did last night for the Panther-Lair show. We do it every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. You won't miss any of that if you subscribe and turn on the notifications right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So different things to talk about. I want to talk about the draft tonight. Blake Hinson. We'll talk about that for a second. One more thought on the transfers that we talked about yesterday on the Morning Pit. But like I say, I'm going to be at Stage AE tonight for the draft party at draft412.com. If you didn't get tickets, well, I'm sorry. You're not going to be able to go to the party. We'll miss you. But make sure you go to draft412.com for all the draft coverage. All the sports teams in town. All the pro sports teams in town. Draft coverage is right there, draft412.com. So make sure you go check those guys out because they have great coverage, and it's pretty cool to see a new outlet coming into the whatever you call it, into the sphere, I guess, locally, with some coverage of almost pretty much exclusively focusing on the draft. So that's pretty cool that they're doing it. I think tonight is not going to be. I mean, it'll be exciting because Elijah Cansey should be drafted in the first round. I haven't really seen much online that seems to go against the consensus that he's a first-round draft pick. So that's exciting. Pitt will have a first-round draft pick for the second year in a row. First time since 2007-2008 that Pitt has had first-round draft picks in consecutive years. Of course, back then it was Darrelle Revis in 2007 and Jeff Otah in 2008. And really, I mean, the list of first-round draft picks in the 21st century is not a long one. I mean, you have Larry Fitzgerald in 2004, Revis and Otah, like I mentioned, Jonathan Baldwin in 2011, Aaron Donald in 2014, and Kenny Pickett last year. So if Elijah Cansey, or maybe when Elijah Cansey is taken in the first round tonight, it'll be the 7th time in the 21st century that Pitt has had a first-round draft pick. And that's, that's exciting. It's good for the program. It's good for recognition. But we always talk about the value of some of these things, the value of something like the NFL draft, or the value of having players from Pitt in the NFL and excelling. And a lot of it is about, and as much as I abhor using these, terms like these, a lot of it is about brand recognition. It's about just reminding people about Pitt. And look, there's going to be a portion of tonight's draft, and it'll probably get brought up a few times. I imagine when Jalen Carter gets drafted, they'll talk about other top defensive tackles on the board. And of course, when Elijah Cansey does get drafted, there'll be, I mean, it'll effectively be how long is it between picks? I mean, you might get a 3 to 5 minute Pitt advertisement when Elijah Cansey gets drafted, because it'll be highlights of Cansey playing. It'll be talk about what he did in his career at Pitt. It's going to be like I said, I mean, it's almost like an ad for Pitt, and that's huge. You can't put a value on that, because it helps bring recognition, and if you're Pitt, I mean, basically if you're anybody outside of like 10 programs, anytime they talk about you on national TV is a good thing, because it's reinforcing your existence, it's reinforcing your relevance, and it's reinforcing you as part of the college football landscape. And so that's huge. And when Kalijah Kancey gets drafted tonight, and I'm assuming he will, it's going to be a good moment for Pitt, for sure. And it'll be exciting to watch, and we'll be excited to see where Kalijah Kancey ends up. And I'll be honest with you. I think I've said this before. I'm not going to run away from it now and pretend like I didn't say it. Certainly, if you asked me before last season, maybe if you asked me at midseason, and maybe even after the season, I probably would have told you that I'm not so sure about Kalijah Kancey being a first-round draft pick. I just felt like he was too small. And yes, we know that undersized defensive tackles can make an impact. There's plenty of evidence of that, both at Pitt and in the NFL. We've seen one guy in particular who did it really, really well at Pitt and in the NFL, but we've seen a handful of other undersized defensive tackles really make an impact as playmakers here at Pitt. And so I'm not doubting that. However, Kancey is smaller than Aaron Donald was coming out of college. And so while he had all this production, he didn't quite have Aaron Donald level production, but he had great production for a defensive tackle and obviously a lot of explosiveness and quickness and strength and all these different things. I said for Kancey to go in the first round, he's going to have off the charts athleticism numbers and testing numbers, to offset, and it has to be better than just really good. It has to be like upper percentile, like the top 1 or 2% to offset the size, to offset how short he is, because he's not a very tall guy. Well, Kancey went out and did it. I mean, he did it. He put up ridiculous numbers for a defensive tackle. He put up ridiculous numbers for a guy who weighs 280 pounds. And so you've got this sort of perfect combination where the only thing missing is a couple inches of height, where you've got, 280 pounds is a solid weight. You've got obviously tremendous production in college. And then you have all these athletic testing numbers that back it all up. In addition to being a smart player, a humble player, a hardworking player. You have the whole package, just missing a little bit of height. But now, because he tested like he did, how does he fall out of the first round? He doesn't. And so it'll be exciting to see where he goes and what he ends up doing, because he certainly had a great career at Pitt, great last couple of seasons at Pitt, and now we'll go to the NFL, and obviously we'll pull for him, hope for him. So we know that's going to happen tonight. It's just a matter of waiting and seeing where he goes and what spot he gets drafted in. But more interesting and more compelling to a certain extent, and more exciting is seeing what happens over the next couple of days when we see who else gets drafted from Pitt. Since the NFL, and credit Jim Hammett for looking up this stat, since the NFL went to the 7-round draft format that they have now, I think they did it around 1994 or something like that, Pitt has maxed out at 6 players taken in a single draft. That's the most they've had. They did it in 2000. What was the other one? 2004. They did it in 2004, the Larry Fitzgerald year, when they had, tell you the other guys, Larry Fitzgerald, Shante Spencer, and Chris Wilson went in the 2nd round. Claude Harriott went in the 5th round. Andy Lee went in the 6th. And Brandon Myree went in the 7th round. And then they matched 6 in 2021. With Patrick Jones going in the 3rd round, Rashad Weaver in the 4th, Jason Pinnock in the 5th, Jalen Twyman and DeMar Hamlin in the 6th, and then Jimmy Morrissey in the 7th. That's been the high watermark, and there's a realistic chance of it happening this year. There's a realistic chance of Pitt getting to 6 again for the first time since 2021, and just the 3rd time since the draft took its current form of a 7-round format. Obviously, Kancey is number 1. But beyond that, you've got, I think, a handful of guys who, could realistically get drafted. Izzy Abanikanda, right, is probably, would be my assumption as the next guy off the board. I talked about him a few weeks ago. We compared the running backs and talked about some of the other top running backs in the draft. He's not going to be the first running back taken. I would probably be surprised if he's taken anywhere higher than 4th or 5th among the running backs. But I think he's got all the makings to have a really good career. He might be missing some of that lateral movement, but he's certainly got the dead ahead breakaway speed, and he's got good size, and he doesn't have that much tread on the tires. You could talk about him missing some games here or there, but he's a running back. I think that's inevitably going to happen. But he's got some good size, and he's on the lower end of carries among these sort of top 10 to 12 running backs that we're talking about. I think it has to be really appealing for an NFL team looking at Izzy Abanikanda in that 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round range. I don't know where any of these guys. I think Kancey's going to go in the 1st round. I don't know where any of these guys are going to go after that. The other 6 rounds. I don't know, and however many other guys get drafted, 4, 5, or 6 or whatever. I don't know where it's going to go or where they're going to go. I can't predict that. People who purport to do this for a living can't predict that. So we're all just sort of guessing here. We're looking at grades online and mock drafts and simulators and combine numbers and all these different things. I have no idea where they're going to get drafted. It seems like Izzy Abanikanda will be anywhere from the 3rd to the 5th. I think if he goes in the 3rd, that would be a huge. I think that would be big. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up maybe a little lower than that. It depends on how these teams rank the running backs and grade them out. Carter Warren has sort of snuck into the conversation as a, kind of a sneaky draft prospect. And I think he's gotten a lot of good pub this offseason. I think he's impressed a lot of teams, and I think he will get drafted. So that takes you up to 3. Servassier Dennis seems like he has done enough to earn himself a spot, to earn himself a draft selection and a spot on an NFL roster. My thing with Servassier Dennis is a little bit size related as well. There's no question about the athleticism. There's no question about the explosiveness. There's no question about the IQ and understanding the game and knowing how to prepare for the game and all of those. There's no question about any of that. My only question is about his size. I forget what he weighed in at Pitt's Pro Day. It was a decent size. It was a solid size. But can he keep that weight on through an NFL camp and through an NFL season? I think that's going to be. I shouldn't say I think that's going to be a challenge. I mean, I don't know what he's capable of or what he can accomplish, but I've heard that concern about Dennis of whether he can stay sort of thick enough to handle it on the field. If he can keep his weight up, I think he can be a really good NFL player. I really do. I think he can be really strong out there and play a long time and use his smarts and athleticism and speed and quickness and all those things and have a nice, long, healthy NFL career. It's just a matter of him keeping that size, because I think if he starts to lose some of that weight, then I think that probably costs him a little bit in his effectiveness. I think Brandon Hill gets drafted in this draft, and the more I look at it, the more I think about Brandon Hill, the more I think this, he could end up being one of the steals of the draft. And again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm a draft expert or draft analyst. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like an NFL analyst or an NFL expert or anything like that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what it takes for a strong safety to make it in the NFL and to excel. But when I look at Brandon Hill, I look at a guy who's a little bit short at 5'10", which puts him, a couple inches below the guys that the Steelers will probably start this year. But I also but a guy who maybe a little shorter, but makes up for it in being built. I mean, I think he's a solid 190 and can probably push close to or over 200 pounds. A guy who has experience playing a very physical position in Pitt's defense, which that boundary safety is a very physical position. Always, it's coming down into the box. It's he's sticking his nose in against the run, making a lot of tackles. That's why you've seen the strong safety be the leading tackler at Pitt quite a few times over the since Pat Narduzzi arrived. It's sort of by design of how that position is being used, and that's what Brandon Hill has been doing, and he's been doing it for 2 years and a little and change, and he's done really well at it. So he's got that physicality, he's got that strength. Because he's a little bit thicker, he's a little bit bigger, but then he's also got plus level athleticism and speed. I was looking at one of the draft breakdown sites, NFL Draft Buzz, or one of the that does a profile for all the guys, and they questioned it. I think he had a lower score on college productivity, which I understand, but some of that is the scheme. That boundary safety position is not necessarily one that's going to have an opportunity for a lot of interceptions, but it is one that's going to have an opportunity for a lot of tackles. Now, I think Brandon Hill has shown that he can play in coverage. I think he's shown the physicality to stop the run. And I think, and I think there will be some extra credit for this, given that maybe the guy running the NFL draft site in, Tucson or someplace may not fully grasp is how NFL coaches view Pitt's defensive system and Pitt's defensive scheme. This is not like a homer take, but I think it is viewed. I think there's some extra respect given to guys who play defense at Pitt and play in Pat Narduzzi's scheme, particularly safeties. Partially due to how they're asked to play in the scheme, and partially due to, I think, the knowledge that those guys end up walking away with. Pat Narduzzi mentioned that he was talking to an NFL scout who said, coach, talking to, this one of your guys that I was talking to, it's like I'm talking to another coach. And I think I think Narduzzi and his defensive staff do pride themselves on preparing the players in that way. And I think guys, particularly at safety and linebacker, really have to master the defense and have almost a coach's level understanding of what's going on out there. And I think Brandon Hill has that. So, it's another guy that you look at and you say, he's just like 2 inches shorter than you would like him to be. If he was 2 inches taller, I think Brandon Hill might be might go in the first 3 rounds. Teams will have to decide how much those 2 inches matter, how much that 1 inch matters. I think he measured at 5'10". So if he was 5'11", if he was 6 foot, he could be a top 3 pick. Teams will have to decide how important is it to be off by an inch or off by 2 inches. But I think he could end up being one of the steals of the draft in terms of a guy who's drafted in the second half of the draft and ends up playing a long career in the NFL. I think he's got that potential. I think he could be really good. And then to get to, so that would be 5, right? That would be Kancey, Abanikanda, Warren, Dennis, and Hill. And to match that number of 6, there's a lot of good options out there. I mean, we haven't talked about Haba Baldonado. We haven't talked about Marcus Minor. We haven't talked about, who's the other one that came to mind? A Deslin Alexandra or an Eric Hallett or Jared Wayne. And I don't know if I think all those guys or any of those guys will get drafted. But there are a lot of guys who played a lot of games, who had a lot of success in college, and have, each of them have their own sort of strong traits that should be appealing to NFL teams and NFL scouts and NFL coaches that I think could end up. It only takes one team, right? It only takes one team to look at Jared Wayne and say, "Boy, this guy's big, runs pretty well. He was really productive in college. Let's give him a shot here. I think he might be able to hang." Or it only takes one team to look at Deslin Alexander and say, "This guy kind of looks like a 3-4 end. He might be able to hold up in there, and even not, or he could play 4-3 D tackle or something like that." It only takes one team to look at Marcus Minor and say, "This dude helped." Pave the way for a guy who set records at Pitt and led the nation in in rushing touchdowns last season. I don't think it's hard. And Haba Baldonado seems like a guy who should be drafted. So that would put them at 6. And then it just takes one team to like Wayne or like Minor or like Alexander or like Eric Hallett. Another productive defensive back playing in this defensive scheme. And, again, I think there's a little bit of extra credit given for that. I was looking back over defensive back numbers, and since Pat Narduzzi got to Pitt, since 2015, and really this is since 2018, is when this trend started. There have been 6 defensive backs drafted. 2018, it was Avonte Maddox and Jordan Whitehead. So Maddox obviously recruited to Pitt, signed with Paul Chryst. Whitehead initially committed to Paul Chryst, then Narduzzi was hired, and he stuck with that commitment and still went to Pitt. Either way, both guys played 3 seasons under Pat Narduzzi, 2015, 16, and 17, before they were drafted in 2018. In 2020, Dane Jackson was drafted. 2021, Jason Pinnock and Damar Hamlin were drafted. And in 2022, Damari Mathis was drafted. Now, like I say, really, Maddox is the only one of those 6 guys who didn't sign with Narduzzi, who signed with Paul Chryst. Whitehead signed with Narduzzi. Dane Jackson signed with Narduzzi. And then all the guys since then, Pinnock and Damar Hamlin and Damari Mathis, they were all recruited by and signed with Pat Narduzzi. So there is a little bit of a DBU thing going on here. Pitt defensive backs getting drafted, ending up in the NFL. And I think that reputation existed when Narduzzi was at Michigan State too. That there's a little extra respect given to defensive backs who play in Pitt's scheme. And so I think that's going to help, or could potentially help, Brandon Hill, Eric Hallett. Next year, Marquez Williams and MJ Devonshire and AJ Woods. I think these guys will get some extra respect for the defense that they played in, not to mention the fact that they played really well in that defense and excelled in that defensive scheme, which, while I think it's a very strong scheme, it's also very sort of unforgiving on the players. And an error can be particularly costly in this defensive system. So, I think it's got a chance over the next few days to be a really good draft for Pitt. With at least 6 and potentially 7 or more guys drafted. I don't know if it's going to get to 7. I don't know if it's going to go beyond 7. But I think they at least get the 6, and then you see what happens with some of those other guys. And if they don't get drafted, I mean, Jared Wayne's going to be in a camp. Eric Hallett's going to get signed as an undrafted free agent. Desmond Alexander probably too. Marcus Minor. It just depends on their luck in those later rounds. But tonight is when the action starts. Kalijah Cansey, the likely option there, and then we'll see what happens over the next few days. I didn't get a chance to talk about Blake Hinson or Keaton Slovis. Maybe we'll have to bring that up tomorrow on the Morning Pit. We'll have a mailbag edition as we've been doing the last few Fridays, so I'm looking forward to that, taking your questions at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. If you have questions for the mailbag edition of the Morning Pit, you can submit them on the Between Fifth and Forbes message board, which is where we take all the questions for the mailbag. So looking forward to doing that. And looking forward to seeing what happens in the NFL draft. Watching for Kalijah Cansey tonight and the rest of those guys over the next few days. So thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun as always. Hope you enjoy the draft tonight. If you're going to be at the Draft 412 party at Stage AE, make sure you look me up and say hello. We'll chat and hang out. And if you didn't get a chance to secure tickets for that thing, well, too bad. But you can still get a lot of great draft coverage at draft412.com. And when they have the party next year, get your tickets early, right? Then we can all hang out. But thanks for tuning in today. I appreciate it. We're almost to the end of the week, and I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. Until then, I hope you have a great Thursday, and we will talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.